Hello. 2026 marks the 40th anniversary of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and its current publishers Cubicle 7 have just announced that to celebrate, they are going to be releasing a 5th edition of the game. So, what does that mean for the future of roleplay in the Warhammer world? Cubicle 7 have released a couple of pieces of art from this new 5th edition, including what looks to be the cover for the core book. Dominic McDowell, the CEO of Cubicle 7, has also said on their website, as Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay nears its 40th anniversary, the team behind the beloved RPG are celebrating the milestone with exciting news, the launch of a new edition. From the announcement that came out via wargamer.com and in a blog post on the Cubicle 7 website, it sounds like there is a lot to look forward to in the future of WFRP. But before we get into that, perhaps we should start by just having a quick look at the past of the game. The first edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, or as it is often known, WFRP, was published in 1986, just 3 years after the first Warhammer Miniatures game had been released. It was primarily written by Phil Gallagher, Jim Bambra and Graham Davis, starting from a treatment that Rick Priestley and Richard Halliwell, creators of Warhammer, had been working on alongside Fantasy Battle, Judge Dredd and 40k. The game that they helped to create was a remarkable achievement, and along with its first campaign, the legitimately legendary Enemy Within, WFRP helped to flesh out the Warhammer world, turning it into a complex, believable setting for low fantasy, grim and perilous adventure. It's from the role-playing game that the faction we would recognise as the Empire actually emerged, and cities like Middenheim and Marienburg became what they are thanks to their appearances in WFRP. The third edition of Warhammer Fantasy Battle that was released the following year owes a huge amount of its world, the first time it appeared in the miniatures game as a tangible thing, to Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Some sections of text are literally reprinted from the role-playing game. Eventually, Games Workshop moved away from role-playing game production. It was simply more profitable to concentrate on miniatures. The RPG imprint, Flame Publications, was cut back and then closed entirely, but WFRP lived on when an independent publisher, James Wallace's Hogshead Publishing, took on the license. Hogshead reprinted much of the original material and continued to write and release new sourcebooks and adventures for the first edition of the game. In the early 2000s, Wallace took the decision to close down Hogshead, and WFRP returned home to Games Workshop. It would be a few years of silence, but in 2005, Games Workshop opened its own new RPG imprint, Black Industries, and teamed up with the game's designers at Green Ronin to produce a second edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. The rules were redesigned, but retained a lot of the grim and deadly feel of the original, and major systems that WFRP had become famous for, like its character careers, were still a huge part of this edition. What was different though was the Warhammer world itself. WFRP 2nd edition took place in the aftermath of the Storm of Chaos, a major narrative event that had taken place in Warhammer Fantasy Battle and in the Black Library novels. It had been intended to move the status quo of the setting into something new. Archaon, the ever-chosen of Chaos, had invaded the Empire and besieged Middenheim, and though the city held, much of the Empire itself lay in ruins, and had expended a huge amount of resources to fend off the chaotic assault. My upcoming video on the Storm of Chaos will cover all of that, as well as its role on the 2nd edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, so keep an eye peeled, because it's coming, hopefully, very soon. WFRP 2nd edition was well received, and there were a huge number of supplements released in very quick time. Unfortunately, it would come to an abrupt end, because GW Top Brass made a shocking decision. They were going to cease production of role-playing games at Games Workshop for the second time. But in 2008, Games Workshop would do a deal with Fantasy Flight Games that would ensure the future of role-playing in the Warhammer world. With Black Industries gone, FFG wound down WFRP 2nd edition, and in 2009, a completely overhauled 3rd edition of the RPG was released. Now, Some folks might argue that this huge box full of tokens, cards, and character sheets looks more like the board games that FFG was famous for than a traditional RPG, and in some ways that's a fair assessment. This edition is quite different to those that came before it, though like Warhammer Fantasy Battle's later editions, it would return the status quo of the Warhammer setting to a pre-Storm of Chaos timeline. Fantasy Flight continued to publish supplements for the game until 2014, when they announced that it was complete and it would get no more official support. Within a couple of years, the licensing agreement between Fantasy Flight Games and Games Workshop would come to an end, and all of the beautiful board games that had been created in the 40k and Warhammer Fantasy worlds, as well as Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 3rd edition, would disappear completely. So that brings us to the latest edition, released in 2018 by Cubicle 7. The 4th edition rules were explicitly built on the basis of the 1st and 2nd edition's foundations, though they're perhaps not quite as deadly for players as those earlier games often proved to be. Over the past 7 or so years, there have been a whole host of supplements released, ranging from new books about the winds of magic or the deep dark jungles of Lustria, to immersive explorations of the Reichland region of the Empire, and a fully revised and updated director's cut of the entire Enemy Within campaign. It was actually overseen by one of the original writers, Graham Davis. Now, full disclosure here, I've actually done some writing work for Cubicle 7, though never on Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. But I hope that that doesn't discount my opinion when I say that I think that they have done sterling work with the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay range. I think that the game books are absolutely beautiful. I think the writing is fantastic and immersive and deep, and I think that there are some really fun ideas across a huge number of supplements that just allow you to explore all kinds of different corners of the Warhammer world. Truly, I think that the 4th edition, as a range of products and as something that gives me the ability to explore Warhammer in a different way and bring it to the table and bring it to life, I think that they're just really, really successful. So I am really a big fan. The 1st edition was around for something like 16 years, with a bit of a break in the middle there. The 2nd edition was around for probably only 3, and there were about 5 years in the life cycle for Fantasy Flight Games' 3rd edition. Cubicle 7's 4th edition has lasted for about 7 or 8 years, roughly speaking. Not that the length of the game's life should indicate when a new edition is required. Really, I think that that's probably more about whether there's a need for it in terms of rules, in terms of consolidation, in terms of exciting new ideas that can bring a game to the next level. There has to, for me, be a reason to do the update, not just simply we've ticked over on the calendar. So do I think that there is space here for a new edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay? Yes, I do. I think we've seen a proliferation of supplements which have loads of great material in, loads of fantastic world building and options, but you also see, when a game like this grows to a certain size and has a certain number of supplements, new rules and revised rules and optional rules start appearing in all of these different books everywhere, and you start getting to a place where you're having to flip through 5 or 6 different volumes in order to find a specific rule for a specific situation in the game you're playing, and that is never fun. So being able to consolidate all of the rules into one place, I think that that could be really worthwhile. It's a great way to do it, but what I don't want to see is all of this amazing range of books that people have invested a lot of time and effort and money in buying, and myself included. I've got not all, but a huge number of these books because I think that they're fantastic. I don't want them to now be obsolete. I want to be able to continue referring back to not just the lore and the world, but also some of the fun careers, some of the fun rules and ideas that exist in those books. You kind of want them to still be around and available. And thankfully, in an interview with wargamer.com and in a blog post on their own website, Cubicle 7 have talked about exactly that. Dave Allen, the producer for the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay game, has said, "Ensuring backwards compatibility has been a very important part of the design process for us. We're gamers ourselves, so we want everyone to be able to keep using their books. Apart from that, we're too excited for everything we have planned for the coming years. We don't want to delay anything, revisiting areas we've already covered." CEO Don McDowell added to that, "It's a development from 4th edition. We've aimed to keep the satisfying level of detail people love while refining the play experience and addressing areas that have caused problems. A further point from Dave about the consolidation of some of those changes was great to read. We've done a lot of work in the details of the system. Talents now apply to specific areas and do that one thing well, avoiding the problem of overlapping bonuses. We've merged resilience and resolve into fate and fortune to reduce tracking those resources. The magic system takes cues from Winds of Magic and integrates that material more tightly into the core rules. So I think that is great. We're going to see backwards compatibility, which means we should still be able to use the majority, I'm going to assume not all, but the majority of those existing books. And there should also be an opportunity here for a lot of rules that have sort of popped up in different places, like revised magic rules and all sorts of other stuff. Hopefully all of that is brought together under one roof in a restructured and tidied up core rulebook that just allows easier access to those rules. It's easier to learn if you can read it all in one place. So I'm very much hopeful that it becomes more accessible, both for new players and for existing players who are looking back for specific rules and stuff like that. I suppose there's also an opportunity to refine things that are a bit fiddly, or like the over-proliferation of meta currencies and things like that, simplify it, and hopefully bring it back in line with something that's a bit more streamlined, but still has all of the right nooks and crannies for fun and deep and immersive gameplay, and is, more deadly than ever. And they have said that they are going to go back to a sort of earlier Wolfrup kind of deadliness for characters and make it a little bit less, I don't want to say heroic, but, we can see, obviously, Dungeons & Dragons goes to a place that's really heroic. Soulbound is very much about heroic characters who are gods amongst men and mortals. Just, that's the very nature of those kinds of characters. Wolfrup has always been at its best when you are you're the rat catchers and you're the grimy, grubby types who could die from a single strike in a single encounter. And that deadliness is fantastic. So keeping that at the core and making sure that that is as deadly as ever, I think is really fun too. I have heard from some folks opinions about the sort of dangers of there being two Warhammer role-playing games around at the same time, two Warhammer Fantasy role-playing games. You have the Old World RPG or Tower, and you have Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay or Wolfrup. Cubicle 7 have been very clear in their commitment to both of those games. They want them to both exist in parallel. There is a curious sort of bit of timing where, because next year is the 40th anniversary for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, it is the perfect time for a new edition. But Tower's first edition has only just gone on pre-order recently and will be coming to shelves and be actual physically available, published in the next year. So you're going to be seeing on shelves a new edition of Wolfrup and the first edition of Tower. Could that be some kind of conflict? Is that going to be confusing? Obviously, I'm sure that potential risk exists, but because of the support that Cubicle 7 are talking about, what they've already announced for both Wolfrup and for Tower, makes me think that there probably is enough space there for both to exist. They have a slightly different perspective on the Warhammer world. Not only is it a different timeline, but there's perhaps a sort of slightly different vibe to both of those games, different areas of focus geographically, and because the supplements are also going in different directions from the sounds of things, that allows, hopefully, a really, really nice parallel existence for both of these games with plenty of support. So I'm cautiously optimistic that there should be lots of Warhammer adventuring possible next year in different games at the same time. In fact, there is a final note from Cubicle 7 in the blog that does suggest that they are already working on a couple of very cool supplements that I'm really excited to hear more about. In the coming months, we'll be visiting Wrecker's Point, exploring a Dark Elf Black Ark, heading back to Marienburg, and embarking on a brand new campaign. There's a lot to look forward to. As a former Dark Elf player in Warhammer Fantasy Battle and Man of War, I am quite excited about the prospect of whether it's an adventure or just a supplement that takes place on a Black Ark. That sounds like it could be really very cool. I'm quite eager to hear more about that. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. And of course, there has been the long announced and hopefully on the way relatively soon, Marienburg book. I'm very much looking forward to getting into that. I love Marienburg as a setting. I've been building a Marienburg army for Warhammer, though it's slowed down, admittedly. That's a project that I'm definitely going to get back into in a big way next year. So there being the opportunity to read more about Marienburg, an updated source book, cannot wait for that. Very much looking forward to it. So I think that there is a really bright future here for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay and the old world RPG. But to see Woofrup getting a new edition when it is turning 40, it's the perfect opportunity. I myself am intending to do some real deep dive videos into the history of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay next year. I want to celebrate it over the course of next year as well. This feels like a really good way to do that. Cleaning up rules, maybe seeing if there isn't any inspiration, any innovation that can come from Cubicle 7's other games that have done some really fun stuff mechanically, whether that's the old world RPG, whether that's Soulbound or any of the other games. Potentially, there might be some new nice tweaks and cleanups and all sorts of good stuff, restructures and everything to make the core book a neater and more accessible book. After 8 years of experience, I'm sure they've got some great ideas to do that, bringing everything into it from all of those supplements, all the core rules that have expanded out there, putting them in one place. Very excited about that. And I will also say that as a complete sucker for special editions, I mean, I've got the special edition that they did of the 4th edition rulebook. I think that they're absolutely stunning when Cubicle 7 do this kind of stuff. I imagine that there will probably be a collector's edition. I'm super excited about the collector's edition for the old world RPG. I think that there's a huge opportunity here to really celebrate the next year and the 40th year of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay in style. So fingers crossed. I'm excited about it. I'm looking forward to it. The Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay being talked about and being out there and having all of the support, I think it's a great thing. And you can bet that I will be back here on the channel talking about Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay a lot next year, including about this new 5th edition. So if you're into that, please join me, like and subscribe, stick around, because Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, it's going to be a big year, I think. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Joylin, and this is Jordan Sorcery.